Hey guys, welcome back to We Met at Acme. I'm so excited to be here with therapist and author of Sovereign Love, Dené Logan. Hi.
Hi, love. Thanks for having me.
Did I do okay? Is it? Yeah, it's Dené.
Dené.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, that's what you said.
Okay. I just, you know how it is. My last name is a mouthful.
Yes.
And no one ever pronounces
What
it
did
right.
they say?
They say, so it's Metzelar, and they say Metzler or Meltzer or Metzler. Like, it's never been, so it's okay though. Like I've accepted it.
I'm often like, I'll respond, but I think before I listened to your podcast, I thought it was Metzler.
Yeah. Which is totally fair.
Yeah.
Totally fair. So before we get into all the things, what is your favorite romantic gesture?
Oh. I think my favorite romantic gesture is something in the realm of I was listening, I was paying attention, and I thought you would like this. I think my best friend is someone who, like, I will bring up something like years ago and she will send me it as a gift years later, and I feel so seen and like, oh God, you really are paying attention. And I think there's something, I love curiosity as like my favorite quality in people, but certainly in romantic relationships. And so I think when someone is like really curious and paying attention to you, and it's clear in the way that they demonstrate it through a gesture, I love that.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I feel like, and something that we're going to talk about soon is like, in long-term relationships, the sex dwindling and other things dwindling. I think the curiosity dwindles.
Oh, yeah.
You stop being curious about your partner, I find.
Absolutely. So it's so funny that you say that, because I feel like early in my book, I was watching couples and I was like, there's something that happens when we get to a point of comfort in relationships. I'm going to speak heteronormatively in this case, but I think it's like across the board, regardless of sexual orientation. But all of a sudden it starts to feel like for the woman in the relationship, I'm not seen anymore. And for a core feminine woman, the arousal space comes from feeling seen. Core masculine men, it's in being trusted. And so that, like, I'm your knight in shining armor thing comes up. But because we don't feel seen anymore, a lot of times that really starts to impact the arousal and the extent to which we feel connected. And it's like in the beginning when someone's courting us, it's like, I planned an evening. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go out. I've got like the whole night planned for us. And it feels very like, oh, you've been thinking about what I would like to do. You've been really like, valuing me, seeing me. And then a little bit into a relationship or a marriage, it becomes like, what do you want to eat? Right. And so it just feels like we slip into a certain level of comfort, which makes us feel like all of a sudden we're not seen anymore. And it really sort of dampens the arousal between two people.
That's so true and so real. And before we get into all of that, what is your current relationship status?
I mean, I dabble to be, I feel like I was married for 12 years and it's so funny because I'm a couples therapist, but I sort of have this fascinating juxtaposition of like when I really started working with couples and feeling like, I've like got my groove with this, and I, for whatever reason, have this ability to translate what is happening between each person in a way that both people felt really sort of like, seen again and understood in what I was helping the other person to see was happening for their partner. And so I was like, oh, I think I'm supposed to be a couples therapist. And I started to get in my groove. And then I realized that my marriage needed to change form. And we were together for 12 years and still have just the most incredible connection. But I was like, God, I think there's so much about the way that we're socialized around relationships to really feel like when a relationship ends, it's a failure. And I don't think that's true. We have the most beautiful 7-year-old boy together, and we've remained like he's my best friend in the world. And we were not meant to be a couple anymore. And so I'm really fascinated by the way that our relationship dynamics are changing and evolving, and how relationships can look like so many different things. And I think what's been fun for both of us is, that at different points in our life, we are meant to explore different types of relationships. And I see him in relationships now that I'm like, oh, this is so much more suited for you than I was at this point in our development.
Right.
But I'm experiencing that for me as well.
That's such a good point of you kind of like being this couples therapist who through your like therapizing others, realized your own relationship. That's almost like a, you know, like a movie, like a series, like that should be like a TV show, but it's so true. It's like, even for me, and I'm definitely not like credentialed the way that you are, but when I was giving dating advice and I was in a relationship that was not great for me, I remember just the fact that I was giving this dating advice heightened it so much to me that I couldn't look away.
Yes.
And the dating advice I started to give started to be based on how not great my relationship was going. Like, I'd be like, it's okay if he doesn't like get you flowers ever. Like, it doesn't mean anything. Or, you know, girls, like, you got to be more lenient. Like, if he doesn't want to go to your friend's wedding, like, he doesn't have to go. Like, things that I was making excuses for.
Yeah, that's so insightful. That's
you
so
know,
real. And I remember doing
and
that.
then like I was like, wait, no. And now, and like I wouldn't say like you have to settle back in the day, but like when I was in a past relationship that wasn't great, like I remember saying you can't have it all, and like that's okay. And now I'm like, yes you fucking can, ladies.
Yeah.
Yes you can. But that's how it was reflective of like how I was feeling at that moment. So what did you do to be able to remain friends with your ex? Because that, and of course it's different when you have a child, there's a very good reason to remain friends, right? But it's still really hard to navigate because there is pain regardless.
Yeah. And I think so much of what causes the pain is so much of the story we've been conditioned to believe about what is true when a relationship ends. And it was such an interesting juxtaposition, again, because like a couple weeks before we decided that, and I often say like our relationship needed to change form because we're still a family. We're a different kind of family. But I had a friend who passed away just a couple weeks, so I was so devastated to lose. And I remember the night that we decided that we were going to separate thinking, well, I'm not going to lose him. Like, he's still here, right? He's not dying. And so maybe I could be a better friend to him in the context of a friendship than I've been in this partnership. And I think both of us were really committed to, we don't want our marriage ending to be the thing that like devastates our little boy or that he has to like get over in his childhood. And so if we hold how do we love one another well as the North Star for him seeing that between his two parents, that he was created in love and respect and that continues. I really tried to navigate all of the things that inevitably come up with that in mind. And so I remember when he first started dating someone and she was like legitimately like a supermodel, and, you know, it was so fun and like cute and like was having fun with my little boy. And I was like, oh, I'm activated. Like, I'm feeling some things. And I was like, okay, well, this is what's happening, Dené. So take a deep breath. And what would love say about this? And I was like, I need to figure out a way to love her. I need to figure out a way to embrace her being in my life and get along with her well. And what's funny is they broke up and we're still close, right? So I kept her, but I think that so often it's like if someone has moved on after your relationship, we tell ourselves the story because we've been conditioned to that means they're choosing that person over us, that we're somehow less worthy, all of the things that it could conceivably mean, but is it true, right? And if it's not true, what else could be true? And I think there was a way that like I was realizing that narrative would create suffering within me. You know, I started to feel like, oh, what if my little boy likes her more than me? Or like, you know, she's very attractive. Maybe I wasn't attractive enough, or whatever the story is in that moment that might come up. And if it's like, if I look for what is beautiful about this situation, this is another person to love my child. This is another person that I get to have support from when sometimes as a single mom, I can be overwhelmed. Then all of a sudden it was like, oh, this feels better. I would prefer to hold it this way.
That's such a good reframe for that. Like, so necessary. Actually, one of the questions that came up, and I'm curious what you think and like what situation you come from. Someone asked, and this is a person who's a child of divorced parents. They said, do children of divorce have a higher chance of divorce themselves? Ooh. I don't know if we even know the stats, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know for sure. I think a couple things I've seen working with clients that are children of divorce. One, I think there's a level of resilience that we don't talk about in terms of like children of divorce end up being really agile. A lot of
Mm,
times they can be in different environments and sort of in some ways they can sort of assess the situation and sort of morph themselves into who they need to be to, survive in the situation. And that could be a good or a bad thing. But I often find that in different environments, they know how to thrive because they weren't sort of like, this is the paradigm of our family. This is the
right,
way things are
right.
done. They've experienced
Like adaptable.
several different families,
Hmm.
right? Um, but I really believe that we are evolving into a time where we're not going to look at divorce as like a devastating thing because it doesn't have to be. Now,
Hmm.
certainly it is a beautiful thing to have long-term partnership when it is aligned and it feels true for both people. But I just believe we're seeing more and more models of if our children were to experience divorce, does that mean that it's a catastrophe? Does it mean that that's a bad thing? Or has this relationship expired and maybe it needs to change form? I think something I really like to normalize with couples is that if you're going to be in a relationship with one person for a lifetime, you're going to be with like 5 to 6 different people because we are all meant to change and evolve. And we really think that's normal from the age of 0 to 18, but that at 18 we should like be a fully formed person, and it's just
Oh,
not the
hell
case,
no.
right?
Yeah.
So if we say like when it makes sense and this is aligned in terms of partnership, beautiful. But if it's not, can we release that and allow it to change form without so much of the suffering? Like I don't really feel concerned about my child getting divorced so much as like him really being in alignment with truth because I see so many people in long-term partnerships that are doing a lot of self-abandoning, that are not fully living, and I don't think longevity is a really great marker of what makes a successful relationship in the way we're conditioned to think it does.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's so interesting because I'm also a parent now of a boy as
Mm.
well. And it just adds such a different layer to your partnership where
Mm.
you're like, you have to be mindful. And granted, our son is 3 months old, but I still am very mindful of like, how are we speaking to each other in front of him?
That's right.
And of course, he doesn't remember, he's not going to remember any of this, let's be honest. But like maybe it has some effect on him if we're, like bickering in front of him as opposed to like showing love for one another and kindness. And I don't know. I mean, it just like it makes you really think about that.
Yeah, and he may not have the context of the language, but he's certainly picking up on the energy of how you feel,
Hmm.
and especially with you, because like he's like a little GPS on his mama, like
Totally.
learning what is safe or not safe within the
Right.
world. So yeah, I think you are sort of his first model of what love is and what it means to be in connection with another person. So absolutely, I think it matters
Yeah.
right
It's wild.
away.
So this article came out
Mhm.
and it was basically, I forgot the exact title and now I'm blanking. But it was something about like, can you have a sexless marriage or something? Was that the title? What was it? It was like,
Like, why are there so many sexless marriages?
right, like something about like what's with the sexless marriage. And I immediately laughed when I saw this article because I was like, so many of my friends are in that sexless marriage
Yeah.
right now. And that doesn't mean that it's permanent. Maybe they just had kids, maybe whatever.
Yeah.
But I saw that and I was like very intrigued. And, I read the article and I also always say, like, it's not like you have to have sex 3 times a week to be in a happy marriage. You have to have sex as often as it makes you and your partner happy.
Yes.
So if you and your partner are the kinds of people who love sex once every 6 months, and when you have that sex, it's like, ooh, it's going to be that sex. And neither of you want it other than that and like don't need to get things elsewhere.
Yeah.
Then that's wonderful for you, And some people aren't as sexual as others. But I just found this article so interesting and I'm wondering like what were some of your takeaways as a couples therapist and also like a person,
Yes. I mean, I have so many thoughts on this and theories about why this is so prevalent. So I think what I say to people a lot is the most common thing people come to see me about is actually a lack of physical intimacy in their marriages. That's the most common struggle I would say couples come in with. And I think the way that we have talked about couples therapy and couples work up to this point has really, from my perspective, been missing the mark in that nobody's talking about patriarchy. Nobody's talking about the history of how relationships were formed and how that impacts the way that we are relating to one another. And so on, both sides. I often say there's an unspoken war of the sexes that nobody's talking about, but it impacts things like how much we are drawn to having sex with one another. So if you think about, first of all, what I like to say and what I have witnessed so commonly is that a society that teaches men, and a lot of times when we talk about patriarchy, people think about it as sort of like an anti-male or anti-masculine stance. It is not. When I talk about patriarchy, I'm really talking about dominance culture, and that we've had like 3,500 plus years of a culture that is really focused on domination. And what that teaches men is a lot of like stoicism, and that they don't get to like fully express the feminine emotional aspects of themselves. So a society that teaches men that you get to feel feelings, either like anger is an acceptable feeling, or you can feel your feelings through sex. What is happening so prevalently in relationships is men are self-regulating through sex, either through porn or through their relationship with their partner. Now, because the core feminine woman feels aroused in the state of actually being seen and witnessed, I know when you're self-soothing through me, you're using sex as a pacifier, and that has nothing to do with me. And so I resent that. And I start to, we get in power dynamics around sex. And so there's a lot of withholding happening. There's a lot of performative sex that's been happening for a very long time that nobody's talking about. And, a lot of the research around like what makes successful relationships and how happy couples thrive, if you actually look at the research, it goes back to the 70s. Well, in the 70s, women couldn't even have their own bank accounts or credit cards. And so a lot of what kept us in these relationships had to do with our survival. So yes, we were having some performative sex, and we were staying in relationships that actually weren't fulfilling in a lot of instances. And so what I see so often is we get into these power dynamics and these ways that we're resistant to having sex that we're sort of not conditioned to really be honest with one another about. And then it just gets to be like this thing where we just stop having sex eventually altogether, because it's the dynamic that we've fallen into, the pattern that's been normalized, and we don't really have a solution to the problem. So let's just chuck it,
Right. Do you think that people just accept not having sex, even if that isn't what they want, more nowadays in marriage? And why? Why are people just accepting that? And I know it gets controversial because it's like the second that you say something that even teeters along the lines of people should be having sex, it gets really for example, I once said on an episode that even if I'm not in the mood to have sex with my partner, but I do it, I'm happy after, something like that. And so many comments being so you're just saying that we should just have sex even if we don't want to, that's rape, all these crazy accusations. And I'm no, that wasn't what I was saying. I was just saying I feel good after it's like going to work out. I don't want to go to the gym, but after I go to the gym, I feel happy that I went to the gym. Sometimes it can be like that. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I'm scared to say it because I have gotten shit for it before.
Well, and again, I think that so often we're not really being honest or even curious really about what actually activates arousal within a woman and because not everyone identifies as a core feminine woman, but in this case, what is arousing to you? And a lot of times you're doing so many things, and you as a new mama are more aware of this than anybody, but we're so conditioned to believe our role is to be giving and nurturing and handling and things that are actually really sort of in opposition to our desire to receive. And one of the things that I see with us and women more than anything else is it can be really difficult to receive. So if you're a woman with a man, you are in receptive mode. You are like receiving him. Now, a lot of times I'm so distracted from the desire to do that, that what you're saying actually makes a lot of sense. Like once we get in the like actual act of it and I'm present with this person and we're doing it, it feels good. It's like a massage, but I might be resistant to carving out the time to receiving self-care or pleasure in that way. But so much of that is our conditioning. Like everything else, everybody else should be first. And we're conditioned to think that's selfish. That's like, being needy. That's taking up too much time. There's just a lot about like, we get so many mixed messages around sex and our sensuality, but we're supposed to like be able to like turn it on, like robots, and we're not robots.
Right.
But to your point, once we get in the act of it, a lot of times connecting with someone we love does feel good, even if a lot of times we're so distracted that we defend against allowing ourselves to be in that space of presence,
Yeah, it's so true. And another thing that I took away from that article is one of the stories, I think it was like the first couple, she, like what she liked about sex was the fact that it was, with these guys who like didn't treat her well, or, it brought up like what made her feel sexy was like how it wasn't like how if it was like a taboo moment, or, if it was like a guy who was more, on the toxic side and things like that. And her husband, she mentions in the art, is like, or they say in the article, is like this nice guy who like always shows up for her and, this and that. And we hear this story over and over again, and like just in life. And she's like not like activated by that because it's not what like used to turn her on and stuff. And I'm sure you hear this with couples all the time. And it's like, well, then what do you do? Like, do you role play and have the guy pretend that he's like some toxic ex of yours,
You can. And I love to encourage couples actually to be in that space of, play. And to me, that is like, and I talk about this a lot in the book, that is the element of the feminine that we've all really been conditioned to reject. So when I hear that story, and actually I read that, and what I think we have really pathologized are these things that are actually like the eros and the life force that aren't like a lot of times in our long-term relationships present because there's so much safety. Now, we need like as human animals, two things. We need attachment. We need a sense of like something that is stable, something that we can root into, but we also need aliveness. We also need the eros, the life force. And so, the way I talk about it in the book is the stability is the masculine, the like containment. And that's what our relationship models have had a ton of emphasis on up to this point. But the aliveness is the feminine, the life force, the eros, the sensuality, all of that. Now, the reason she feels that outside of the relationship container is because there isn't that safety. And some of that is good. Like we're most attracted to our partners a lot of times when there's distance, when they're traveling, when someone else sees my partner and I'm like, oh, you like that? That's mine. Or I like that's my man, whatever. When I feel a little bit of like, when we've had like conflict or something and we come back together, like all of these things that like bring that eros, that life force, that I'm not safe for a moment.
Right.
That is the feminine wild within all of us, regardless of gender, that all of a sudden it's like, oof, I feel aroused by this, but we've sort of made like, you shouldn't need that, but we do need that. That's why a lot of times the person that's like not safe or the bad boy or whatever it is that we're like, why am I so aroused by this person that I shouldn't be? It's because there's a lack of safety that is actually the feminine elements of who we are that we've just been really conditioned to believe aren't a necessary part of life, and it is.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I just saw this movie, The Challengers, or maybe it's just called Challengers with Zendaya. Have you seen like previews for this at all?
I love her.
Love her. And in the movie, and I just kind of briefly talked about this on an episode already, but in the movie, she plays this like badass female tennis player, and without giving too many, like without giving spoilers away, she's like in a triangle with these two guys, and she is like a very she's a very convicted woman who like knows her worth and like knows, you know, she's a badass. Like she's like a female tennis player. Like she's a female athlete. Like they're fucking amazing, right? And she is like on this level, and it's really hard because she's deciding kind of between two guys, one of which who like bows down to her and kind of like is at her whim, and the other who's more like her equal, but like is never going to like be her fan. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so she has to kind of decide between someone who is, you know, would do anything for her and someone who's on her level. And I'm curious, and I'm not going to confirm or deny because I don't want to do that to people listening who haven't seen it, but which do you think she chooses?
Oof. Well, I would say, like, if I were a betting woman, I would bet that she chooses the safety, because there's so much. I mean, well, maybe it's a movie, so maybe like she goes for like what is the romance, which is a lot of times the aliveness. But this battle between the safety and aliveness is like, and it's to me the masculine and the feminine is alive in all of these dynamics. Like you'll get to the point where you just like see it everywhere.
I know. And I feel like I'm almost like beating a dead horse because we have talked about this on so many episodes now. And I'm like, why do we keep talking about it? Oh, because it's just, that's just life. That's just what it always comes back to.
Yeah.
And it pisses me off because I'm like, it doesn't have to be so one extreme or the other.
That's right.
You don't have to choose a guy who's a doormat for you versus a guy who's going to cheat on you and break your heart. There's not these two different polarities in hetero relationships. You can find someone in the middle. Like, I really do believe that you can. And that's what I always say when I'm like, don't settle. Like, you can find the mix. I do think that you can find it. But also what you're talking about like the safety element and that being, you know, something that makes women more attracted to men. I always say you should have 90% security in your relationship, but 10% insecurity.
Yes.
And you need that 10% insecurity, especially as a woman, but also as a man dating, you know, in the hetero situation.
Yeah.
Because if you have 100% safety in your relationship, it's over, I think.
Couldn't agree with you more. And I think that what actually provides safety a lot of times is a little bit different than we've been conditioned to think. It's not so much about, you know, the like financial security or the like, you know, because a lot of times, a lot of the things that we're conditioned to think provide safety end up being a little bit boring. But I think someone who knows themselves well, someone who's got a backbone and is not going to like let you walk all over them or be your doormat, I think those things end up like, because the feminine will always test the masculine. Like, can you contain and like, can you hold all this without being freaked out? Right. And so there's like that element of testing that is like the dance between two people. I don't know if you saw that movie, Poor Things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like where she's like in all of the things that we are conditioned to like really suppress within ourselves. And there's an element of her feminine wild that as she starts to like take in the society around her, she's like, am I going to put this down? Am I going to like continue to be this fully expressed self? But there's this line that, and I'm blanking on the name of the male character.
Mark Ruffalo.
Thank you. Mark Ruffalo's character says to her, I love you. I want to marry you. And she's like, I'm betrothed to somebody else. I can't marry you. And he's like, I love you. I'm going to throw you over the ship if you don't marry me. And she's like, so you love me, but you want to kill me if I won't marry you?
Right.
And I noticed with couples, there's this dynamic of like, I own you or you're nothing to me. And something that I've found is a little bit in what you're saying so helpful is to bring like a little bit of suspending our disbelief that like, I don't ever own my partner, because there's aliveness in that. Like if you're never fully mine, if I feel like I always have to be like present with like, yes, we have a child together, we have a life together, but I don't take for granted that you're always going to be here. I find sometimes that can like insert that little 10% of aliveness in the dynamic where if I have full ownership over this person, not only do we start to feel a little bit of just like entitled to things or there's taking for granted, but there's also not that like eros, that like
Right.
shot of aliveness that you're right, all couples need.
Yeah, that's so true. And even with like making plans, like my husband, he'll never be like, can I go to dinner with my friends? It's more like, do we have something that night?
Yes.
But it's never like asking permission to do something.
So important.
And if he did, and obviously things are a little bit different now because one of us has to be home with the kid, but like if he did ask permission, not because of the situation with Zachary, our son, but like if he asked permission just in general to do something for himself, I would be so turned off. Like I would be like, what?
Yes. There's so much about the way that we're socialized in our relationships, and this is another thing to the sexless marriages, that really puts women in maternal roles with our partners. And so it's like happy wife, happy life. Like I hear that and it's like nails on a chalkboard. I'm like, stop saying that.
Wait, tell me.
It's a lot of times like we're making the men in our lives infantilized. And it's like, you have to ask for permission. And what does my wife want? I'll go along with whatever she wants. But that puts me in a really maternal role with you, which is actually, and this is the thing about motherhood that I'm sure you're experiencing with the 3-month-old, it's actually really masculine energy. It's very like task and delegate and handle and keep this child alive and containment and safety, all of this like masculine energy that we are in when we're mamas. And what I find ends up happening so often with couples is I always say like the first 2 years of parenthood, and you're right, like a lot of people stop having sex, but a lot of it is because we as women are so in our masculine, and it's almost like a battle of the alphas. Like the new dads are like, what is my role here? What do you need from me? I feel like everything I do is making you mad at me. But also that we're so like, I want to feel in my feminine, and it's really hard for me to access right now. So, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, like so much of what we need to do is like figure out ways to cultivate that energy. And in heteronormative dynamics, if the man can be really supportive of like, I'm containing, I got this, you go do something with your girls, get out of here a little bit, and taking on that space of like containment and like, I got you. It's safe to soften a little bit when we're just so like, I got to be on, I got to handle this, I got to make sure this child is good. It's healthy and it feels amazing.
That's such a good point. That's so spot on. It's like we really are in our masculine as like new moms, because you're like, you know, it's like animalistic almost. Like you're like, oh, like this is like my cub, and like I need to protect it, and like I need to be in charge now, and I know more than he does, so like I need to do, you know, it's like a whole thing. But it's really comforting to hear that you think that can be up to 2 years, because I have talked to my mom friends who have agreed that like, you know, after post baby, the bickering and like all the stuff like that's very real, but it's good to know that it kind of alleviates.
Yeah. I mean, we're so in survival, and a lot of that is the nature of the nuclear family system doesn't really support women in early motherhood in the ways that certain cultures do. Like I was just reading this article about how in Japanese cultures, there will a lot of times like be someone who comes in and supports a new mama, and like, you have time to heal, and I'm going to like bring you the baby and pamper you, and like all of the things to like really nurture you back into that space of feeling like the baby's good, the baby's safe. You can soften back into, you know, it's like a cataclysmic shift for the psyche when we go from being a maiden to being a mother, and we're really not supported in that. And I'm like the most introverted person on the planet, but I have never felt more hungry for connection with other mamas than right after I had a baby. I was like, I just like want someone to like support me in knowing like this is going to be okay, because you're just so like exhausted and surviving. And for two people to try to do that without, you know, we used to be communal animals, and so we used to have an entire village of women supporting us. It was all of our baby, but now it's just us, these two people trying to work this out, and it's not enough. So I really love to normalize for couples, this isn't forever, but these first 2 years are really, really taxing. And if we can just sort of name that, a lot of times it takes some of the power away from it. But certainly carving out support systems and other ways to tackle it, knowing that it's going to be really hard and we're going to be exhausted. And in that space of battling it out a little bit.
It's so real. Okay, so this is another question that came in, and then we'll do some fun rapid fire. Well, we'll do 2 and then these fun rapid fire ones. Someone said, I struggle with projecting trust issues onto my current partner from my trust issues with my parents. How do I not do that?
Well, I think whenever there is a trust issue with another person, I really think it's our work to get into right relationship with the trust I have for myself, right? Because a lot of what ends up happening that makes us feel like I wouldn't be okay no matter what happens is like whatever the story we tell ourselves is about, like what would happen. Like, so if I don't trust this person because I feel like they would cheat on me, I love to play the tape through. So if that were to happen, what would I do? If that's happened in the past, how did I handle it? And that sort of gives the psyche a way of sort of softening into, and I was okay, right? And ultimately, I often say, like, humans are gonna human. We in our relationships want to make this other person this omnipresent figure that's never going to let me down and never going to feel afraid or fall short. And they will. And so, when I'm working with couples, I love to sort of like, how do we humanize our partner and even humanize our parents? Like, I think a lot of times what we don't think about when we're young and until we sort of step into a partnership or, parenthood ourselves, we don't really realize like our parents were just like doing the best they could with the tools they had. But a lot of times they didn't have a ton of tools. Where a lot of us are working to have more tools these days. But I think there's a way to sort of like normalize like their humanity and that our parents didn't have all the answers that we imagined when we were young. They did, but neither do our partners. And so the trust and the consistent that will always be there is me. And if I believe that like whatever life throws at me, I'm going to be able to tackle it, then I think we can just hold whatever the situation is in the other person with so much more grace.
Yeah, I love that. That's so true. And then the other one that came up is what do you do if you have life more together than your partner?
Oh. That's interesting. Because I was just listening to Dr. Gabor Mate talk about like how like water meets at the same level. And a lot of times what I hear, and especially I'm going to like to my sisters on this one, like we will feel like with the man in our lives that we're like falling in love with potential. If I could just, and that's an element of the feminine, right? Like we see things through expansion and what's possible, and we can see like a clear vision of like the big picture a lot of times. Sometimes where like with men, that's like there'll be a little bit more like linear, and this is the structure of it, and this is what makes sense in that way. But to circle back to the question, if my partner is not where I believe they need to be, I would sort of be curious about like where are they more in alignment with me than I may think that they are? And because I chose them for a reason, I guess is my point. And like I believe and often say to people across the board, like keep doing your work and the relationship will either rise to meet you where you're going or it will fall away as it's meant to. But I think a lot of times we get into the practice of sort of distracting ourselves from our own stuff, our own discomfort, our own anxiety by like, this person needs to do this. And if I can just get them where I believe they need to be, then I'll be okay. And then I'll be able to exhale.
Right.
And I find that like normally it doesn't work, first of all, but also that's a distraction from something within myself that I don't want to look at.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I think that's a great point of like it, like just worry about you and like if they're never gonna meet you there, like they will fall away. And I think like I think about some of my friends who I think we just are biased with our female friends. Like we always think they're probably better than their partners, even if that's not even the case. And I like wonder about them and their relationships. And I'm like, is he ever going to be as great as she is? And it's like, you know what? I don't need to wonder because if he's not, then like it'll fall away.
Yeah. And I think there's different ways that like the development is more aligned than we think it is. Like sometimes like I may have where I am in my career is not where he is, but there's a way like emotionally we're meeting each other and it's at the same level.
Right.
Now, if I keep doing my own inner work, that relationship won't be aligned anymore. And I've just seen too many times it eventually will fall away. But for whatever reason, this is what's working for me right now and what I'm drawn to, you know?
That's so true. All right. We're going to do some fun rapid fire questions. Just a few here. Your significant other cheated a few months ago and you forgave them. Can you change your mind and break up now? Or do you have to get over it because you forgave them?
No, you do not have to get over. No, you can always make a U-turn at any point.
Mm-hmm. Is it normal for guys to hang out with a group of girls at a bachelor party? Yes or no?
Normal. I mean, I feel like I don't know that there's a normal. I think we need to put down there's a normal way to be a little bit more and just like, what does it bring up for you?
Right.
With a group of girls at a bachelor party, right?
If someone has a child, relevant, how soon into dating should they disclose that they have a child? First date, second date,
Right
third
away.
date? Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Like put it on your dating profile.
Please don't date me if you're not interested.
Right.
in a woman with a child. Like, let's just get that out there.
Was your best sex with your most toxic person?
Absolutely. Yes, it was.
Of course, always.
Always.
Is it weird for your boyfriend to compliment your girlfriend's outfits when you go out?
I don't think so.
Yeah. If it were weird,
How
if it were
complimentary
weird,
we're talking.
if it were weird, is it because it's a little like effeminate or it's like a little pervy or creepy?
I mean, I guess I would be curious about what he's saying, right? Like if he's like, your boobs look amazing and that, then that could be a little bit like, oof. But no. And I think that some of that, you know, we really perpetuate these patriarchal narratives of who men need to be. Like it's effeminate for men to think a woman's outfit looks like we got to put this stuff down because we're also conditioning men to suppress some of
That's
their
so
healthy
true.
feminine.
That's so true. Unless he's like, oh my God, is that the new like season of
I mean,
Gucci? Like
listen.
2023? Did you get that at
I'm like, if
this-
you know about Gucci, probably would know more than I would. I'd be like, no, educate me. I have no idea.
Right. That's amazing. This has been so much fun.
Aw.
Can you leave us with a quote or piece of advice?
Oh, you know, something that I often say to couples and has just been one of my life mantras. You don't need anyone to be anything other than exactly who they are for you to decide who you're going to be.
I love that.
Mm.
That's so good. I like need to say it again and again and again.
Myself too.
Where can everyone find you, follow you, and read your book?
Thank you. I'm Dené.Logan on Instagram and Dené Logan on all of the handles and channels. And I have a podcast too called Cheaper Than Therapy where I talk all about the therapy stuff.
That's a great name. I love that. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's so great.